Hello and good evening. It's certainly an honor to be invited to speak before you tonight on behalf of the Research Lodge of Oregon, number 198, chartered in 1932. It is the third research lodge chartered in the United States, the oldest research lodge on the West Coast, and the second oldest research lodge in America. My name is RWBr. I am a past master of both that lodge and Portland Lodge, number 55 in Portland, and I am currently serving as District Deputy of the Grand Master of District Number 4 of Ancient Free and Accepted Masons in Oregon. Although I dipped my toe in the Scottish Rite's deep and storied waters about 11 years ago, during a 4-year spell in Michigan, I have primarily devoted my Masonic scholarship and discipline to Blue Lodge history and ritual. You can imagine, then, my reaction when Worshipful Brother McCallum approached me to speak upon the topic of the circular throughout 2 hemispheres, or the 1802 Manifesto. It wasn't a subject matter with which I was familiar, and upon brief inquiry anticipated it to be something of which most Scottish Rite members were likely to have a decent understanding. I was plainly told, however, that such is not the case, and that a presentation of this nature would be an insightful one. Therefore, what better job for a member of Research Lodge than for some good old-fashioned digging into such an important subject matter? Now, of course, before diving directly into the Manifesto itself, it would befit us all to recount a bit of the names, facts, and figures essential to its creation and understanding. The history of the Scottish Rite, as with so much of Freemasonry, begins in a shroud of uncertainty. Though records suggest its origin as recently as the 18th century, an exact lineage and timeline aren't as discernible as one might think. Certain dates, names, and locations related to its founding are unambiguous enough, but a direct connection to Frederick the Great, for example, appear to be only ostensibly true. As I discuss the content of the Manifesto, as well as its purpose, you'll see that it alludes to, as is common in our craft, much of the allegorical truths, so to speak, that suffer neither harm nor foul upon the fabric of our beliefs. So, who was Etienne Morin? Etienne Morin deserves the majority of the credit for establishing the rite of perfection in the Western Hemisphere. Specific documentation detailing his own history is difficult to find because his name is a common one for the time period. But first accounts of the Morin with which we're concerned cite him in living in the West Indies with a prior connection to Bordeaux, France. It is believed that Morin was made a Mason in Loge-le-Française in that city in approximately 1741. 2 of the earliest lodges to have taken a significant interest in the Écossais, or Scottish Rite degrees, were the aforementioned Loge-le-Française and Loge Parfait Harmonie, the latter of the 2 in which Morin, in 1744, ascended to the position of Worshipful Master. Upon traveling to the West Indies, Morin set up an Écossais chapter in Santo Domingo, a French colony at the time on the island of Hispaniola. It is noted that Morin, quote, was a difficult person, inclined to overstep his Masonic authority, end quote. This friction and un-Masonic behavior prompted his return to France in 1759 at the behest of his superiors. In 1761, the French Grand Lodge issued a patent to Morin as a Grand Inspector, quote, authorizing and empowering him to establish perfect and sublime Masonry in all parts of the world, end quote. Around 1763, Morin created and promoted a Masonic rite, which he called the Order of the Royal Secret, or Order of Prince of the Royal Secret. This immediate predecessor to the Scottish Rite consisted of 25 degrees under the secret constitutions of 1761 and the constitutions of 1762. Morin then returned to Santo Domingo in 1763 with the intent of promoting the rite of perfection throughout the Western Hemisphere. He appointed several deputy inspectors general and gave them the authority to propagate the superior degrees of free and accepted Masons throughout their territories. Masonic tradition informs us that lodges in this rite, imported from Bordeaux through the West Indies and then Kingston, Jamaica, to all the American mainland, were instituted in New Orleans, Louisiana in 1763, Albany, New York in 1767, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1781, and Charleston, South Carolina in 1783. Charleston is especially important to remember because it ends up playing the primary role in the creation of both the Scottish Rite as we know it, as well as the 1802 Manifesto. While Morin died in 1771, before the first official Supreme Council was formed at Charleston in 1801, he deserves credit for laying the foundation of the Rite we know so well today. The birth of the Scottish Rite, Charleston, May 31st, 1801. Although most of the Scottish Rite's 33 degrees already existed in parts of previous degree systems, like Morin's Order of the Royal Secret, the Scottish Rite did not truly come into being until the formation of the Mother Supreme Council at Charleston, South Carolina, in May 1801. The founding fathers of the Scottish Rite who attended became known as the 11 Gentlemen of Charleston. Although I won't recount the importance or roles of all 11 members, there are two especially worth mentioning tonight: John Mitchell and Frederick Dalcoe. So who was John Mitchell? Born in Ireland in 1731, John Mitchell was an officer of the American Army in the Revolutionary War, during which he held the title of Deputy Quartermaster General. The primary duty of this role was not only to supply officers with whatever they might need, but to make sure the requested items were rightfully received. This responsibility subsequently brought Mitchell into the repeated services of George Washington's family, and, one might surmise, possibly into the craft. According to Grandmaster Fitzgibbon of Ireland, Mitchell is thought to have been initiated in Ulster Lodge No. 8 in Charleston, and from Mackey we learn that, quote, on June 25, 1781, Baron M. Spitzer, in a convention of inspectors held at the city of Philadelphia, conferred the degrees and the rank of inspector upon Colonel John Mitchell, end quote. 2 years later, he became Master of the Lodge of Perfection, established in Charleston. In 1789 to 1790, Mitchell was Junior Grand Warden of the Grand Lodge of South Carolina, and 10 years later, 1799 to 1800, he sat as Deputy Grand Master. Who is Frederick Dalcoe? Dalcoe was a physician of Prussian descent born in London, England, in 1770. His father, a distinguished officer under Frederick the Great, a likely explanation for the acceptance of the monarch's involvement in the ratification of the Grand Constitution of the 33rd degree, had retired to England for his health. Following his father's death, Frederick immigrated to Baltimore, Maryland, at the invitation of his uncle, where he received a classical education. He then entered the medical department of the U.S. Army and was stationed at Fort Johnson, Charleston Harbor. He resigned soon after in 1799 and came to practice finally in Charleston. Beyond his association with the Supreme Council, Dalcoe published in 1807 the Ahman Resin for the Grand Lodge of Ancient York Masons for the state of South Carolina. He would later bring the Ancient York Grand Lodge and the Grand Lodge of Free and Accepted Masons of South Carolina together to form the Grand Lodge of Ancient Freemasons of South Carolina. On May 24th of 1801, John Mitchell made Dalcoe Supreme Inspector General of the Order of the Royal Secret. The following week, the Supreme Council of the 33rd degree for the United States of America was opened, agreeably to the Grand Constitutions, with Mitchell and Dalcoe overseeing the proceedings. The Supreme Council was by all means a superior system to Morin's Order of the Royal Secret, administering 33 degrees, including all 25 of Morin's Rite. The traditional authority of the Supreme Council stems from the Grand Constitution of the 33rd degree, also Grand Constitutions of 1786, claiming to be ratified by Frederick II, King of Prussia. Its 18 articles, whose earliest known copy dates from about 1801 to 1802, and is written in Reverend Dalcoe's hand, are preceded by the Constitution, statutes, regulations, etc., for the government of the Supreme Council of Inspectors General of the 33rd degree and for the government of the councils under their jurisdiction. The Manifesto also claimed that Frederick the Great prompted its creation. On the 1st of May, 5786, the Grand Constitution of the 33rd degree, called the Supreme Council of Sovereign Grand Inspectors General, was finally ratified by His Majesty the King of Prussia, who was Grand Commander of the Order of Prince of the Royal Secret, possessed the sovereign grand power over all craft. In the new Constitution, this high power was conferred on a Supreme Council of 9 brethren in each nation, who possesses all Masonic prerogatives of their own district, that this Majesty individually possessed, and are sovereigns of Masonry. The association of Frederick the Great was repeated in the history which was conveyed in the original 33rd degree ritual. The most puissant Grand Sovereign, Grand Master Commander-in-Chief, Sovereign of sovereigns, of the degree of the Prince of the Royal Secret, was our illustrious brother Frederick II, King of Prussia. He established this degree in concert with our brother, His Serene Highness Louis of Bourbon, Prince of the Blood Royal of France, and other illustrious characters who had received the degrees of Knights of Kadosh and Prince of the Royal Secret. This new degree he called Sovereign Grand Inspectors General, or Supreme Council of the 33rd. Like Morin's Constitution and Regulations of 1762, it is thought by many modern Masonic historians that the Grand Constitutions of 1786 should be viewed through a traditional lens rather than one of historical accuracy. Following investigation into its potential origins, Albert Pike accepted the tradition regarding Frederick the Great's involvement and alleged role in the creation of the Supreme Council. Pike did assert, however, that whatever the origins may be, the formal adoption of any law forms a legal basis for government. Modern opinion commonly agrees, maintaining that, at a minimum, the story of the origins of the constitutions of 1762 and 1786 are not unlike the legends retained in the old charges, providing a traditional environment for the degrees, just as the biblical account of King Solomon's Temple forms the symbolic infrastructure of craft masonry's origins. The scope and authority of the early Supreme Council. The Supreme Council at Charleston, as it is often known, was the first Supreme Council of the 33rd degree in the world. Remarkably, it continues to exist today as the Supreme Council of 33rd degree Southern jurisdiction, and though its see remains in Charleston, the Council's headquarters was moved to Washington, D.C. circa 1870, residing at the House of the Temple. As the premier Supreme Council, it employed authority over the entire country, citing Colonel Mitchell as, quote, Grand Commander in the United States of America, end quote, as well as, quote, President of the Supreme Council of Masons of the United States, end quote. In its infancy, the Supreme Council issued warrants of constitution to create sublime Grand Lodges of perfection, overseeing the 4th through 14th degrees, and Grand Councils of Princes of Jerusalem, overseeing the 15th and 16th degrees, but refrained from direct oversight of either of those bodies' governments or administration. The Supreme Council only exercised direct control over the 16th degree Prince of Jerusalem. This was defined in both the circular throughout 2 Hemispheres and Dalco's manuscript of the Grand Constitutions of 1786. Article the 6th. The power of the Supreme Council does not interfere with any degree below the 17th or Knights of the East and West, but every council and lodge of perfect Masons is hereby required to acknowledge them in quality of Inspectors General, and to receive them with the high honors to which they are entitled. This condition was reiterated in the original ritual of the 33rd degree. The King, on the 1st of May, 5786, formed and established the 33rd degree to give some elucidations to the Knights of Kadosh. The King was conscious that, agreeably to the common course of human nature, he could not live many years, and he conceived and executed the glorious design of investing the sovereign Masonic power which he held, as Sovereign Grand Commander of the Order of Prince of the Royal Secret, in a Council of Grand Inspectors General, that they might, after his decease, regulate, agreeably to the Constitution and statutes, when he then formed the government of the craft in every degree, from the 17th or Knights of the East and West inclusive, leaving the control over the symbolic lodge, the grand, ineffable, and sublime lodge of perfect Masons, and the Knights of the East or Sword, to the Grand Council of Princes of Jerusalem, whom he conceived to be justly entitled to that honor and power. According to the circular throughout 2 Hemispheres, at the time of the Supreme Council's creation, the 30th degree, 31st degree, and 32nd degree collectively constituted the degrees of, quote, Prince of the Royal Secret, Prince of Masons, end quote, meaning then that only 15 degrees were under direct control of the Supreme Council. The government of the system in its entirety, therefore, from the 4th degree, Secret Master, to the 32nd degree, Royal Secret, was not appropriated until after the revival of American Freemasonry in the 1840s, following the Morgan Affair, an incident in 1826 where an infiltrator of the craft disappeared under unscrupulous circumstances after threatening to publish an exposé on the secrets of Freemasonry. The ramifications led to decades-long anti-Masonic rhetoric, both cultural and political. Although not previously acted upon hitherto, the authority to govern the entire system of degrees resided with the officers of the Supreme Council, who were, quote, sovereigns of Masonry, end quote, and, quote, possessed the sovereign Masonic power over all the craft, end quote. The high degrees were typically referred to as the ineffable and sublime, or superior degrees. In the Scottish Rite's infancy, these degrees were conferred only on past masters, or virtual past masters, of Blue Lodges. Frederick Dalco's fourth degree, Secret Master, ritual dated 1801, explains, quote, the Blue Past Master or candidate must be examined in the antechamber by the Master of Ceremonies in his 3 first degrees, and in the secrets of the chair, unquote. Additionally, the circular throughout 2 Hemispheres tells us that sublime Masons, quote, communicate the secrets of the chair to such applicants who have not already received it, previous to their initiation into the Sublime Lodge, but they are at the same time informed that it does not give them rank as past masters in the Grand Lodge, end quote. It wasn't until 1804 that the name Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite came to be. In that year, Alexandre Auguste de Grasse Tilly, a member of the Supreme Council at Charleston, was tasked with organizing a Supreme Council in France. In an agreement made between the newly created Supreme Council and the Grand Orient of France, which operated as a Grand Lodge, the title Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite, Rite Accorsés Anciens et Acceptés, was adopted. Beginning with the authority of Grand Commander Albert Pike in 1859, it came into general use in the southern jurisdiction in the U.S. and elsewhere about the world. This marked the beginning of the appendant body's long and celebrated story as we know it today, whose membership has devoted so much talent, effort, and scholarship in establishing a benchmark for Masonic education and brotherhood. Well, thank you. That concludes my presentation. I would like to thank Worshipful Brother Sean McCallum and the Portland Valley of the Scottish Rite for inviting me to speak to you tonight. It's been quite an honor and privilege to do so. I hope you learned a few things you didn't already know. I know I learned a lot. So please do good unto all and live in peace.